one of the most amazing things to me, you go to a university, like the university where I work. I mean, there's no geology department anymore. They've got rid of geology. Now, you know, it's mind-boggling, right? I mean, we live on Earth, right? A giant rock, nothing but geology, right? I mean, it's where all of our minerals come from. It's where we get oil, gas, dinosaurs, gold and silver, and basically everything comes out, think about all of our minerals and soil that makes all of our plants grow comes from the rocks. And yet, we don't have geology departments anymore. As if what? I mean, we've got probes out there examining other planets, right? When we don't even understand our own planet that well.
Welcome to yet another installment of Behind Greatness by Inspire. Before we get into our next conversation here with Jack, I want to take the time here to remind you, the listener, subscribe and share with your friends if you haven't already to this point. And if you have, thank you. Please continue to do so. This is how we're growing through word of mouth. And our listeners are giving us really, really good feedback, and it makes us fairly happy. And that's because we do this out of love. This is a project of love. And our regular listeners will know we've been doing this for a very long time. We've been doing this actually 11 years, the podcast for 3, all under a not-for-profit. We give our time and passion to this. And if any of you would like to at any time donate or give to our cause, our mission of exploring the what ifs and why nots, by all means, go to our website, behindgreatness.org. And you can find a couple of things there. Number one is our library of all conversations that we've been having, and then where to donate quite easily. As a charity, we issue tax receipts. Listeners already know that. All right. So today, on a special anniversary day, of which I was reminded, I had no idea. We'll talk about this in a few minutes. We are joined with paleontologist Jack Horner. I'll read a little bit of his bio so that you can understand a little bit of context before we get going and discovering. Jack is a dyslexic paleontologist. He is a presidential fellow at Chapman University in Orange, California, and Regents Professor of Paleontology Emeritus at Montana State University in Bozeman, Montana. He is known for his groundbreaking discoveries of the first dinosaur eggs in the Western Hemisphere, the first evidence of dinosaur colonial nesting, the first evidence of parental care among dinosaurs, and finding the world's first dinosaur embryos. He is widely regarded as one of the world's foremost paleontologists, noted for his fieldwork in Montana, where he has amassed one of America's largest dinosaur collections. Horner is a recipient of the MacArthur Fellowship Genius Grant and has been awarded 2 honorary doctorates, one from the University of Montana, the school he attended, and another from Pennsylvania State University. He has named or co-named 10 dinosaur species and has had 4 dinosaur species named after him. Horner has more than 350 publications, including 9 popular books and 2 co-edited technical volumes. He has been the subject of numerous TV documentaries, and he has served as a technical advisor for all 6 of the Jurassic Park and Jurassic World movies, and is in fact the inspiration for the movie's lead character, Dr. Alan Grant. He is currently co-directing a developmental biology project attempting to retro-engineer dinosaur characteristics that have been lost during the evolution of dinosaurs to birds by creating what he calls a chickenosaurus. He uses the project to interest children of all ages in technical sciences such as genetics and developmental biology. He is a co-founder of Horner Science Group, a business creating augmented reality apps and exhibitions about dinosaurs. And he lectures on dinosaurs, evolution, and dyslexia. He now lives in Orange, California. Jack, thank you for listening to your own bio. And for coming on the show. before we get started, I wanted to mention too, folks can visit you in a variety of ways. You have two websites, jackhornerdinosaurs.com and hornersciencegroup.com. And then I don't know how many TED Talks you've had, probably 5 or 6, I think.
Two.
Oh, well, then they're all snippets that I've been watching because I can't get enough of Jack Horner. You told me something via text before we started recording, and then it got me thinking, oh yeah, that's right, 1993. So I thought, because you said happy Jurassic Park anniversary.
Yes, I did.
So it's been 30 years. That's fantastic. And then you showed me tickets, right? So when we got on this call, you showed me tickets, and it's actually to the day, June 9th.
Yeah.
So I promise you, and I promised you before this, and I promised the listener, this was not done intentionally. So when I asked you last month, when I gave you a date for possible recording, you thought I knew what that date was about.
I did. I assumed you did. Yes.
I did not. It looks like we were communicating on another level because I must have known. Bananas. So June 9th, 1993 is when Jurassic Park first came out. And Jurassic Park, so I did a little bit of homework too. Jurassic Park was a movie made from a book, title of the same. And what was his name? Michael Crichton. And he based the lead character on you.
Well, not exactly. The character he created was kind of a combination of two paleontologists, myself and a guy named Bob Bacher, who works out of Colorado. And then when Steven Spielberg, when they started making the movie, they decided to separate the two characters. So I became Alan Grant, and Bob Bacher's character was recreated as Robert Burke in the second Jurassic Park movie, The Lost World.
So we reached out to you because I had as a kid, a fascination with dinosaurs, an absolute fascination. Here's my question to you, because I can't explain why I did. And I wanted to bring that fascination to my kids when they were young as well. And they had a definite interest in dinosaurs, but not like I had, it seemed. I don't know why. Why is it that kids like dinosaurs? What is it about dinosaurs that gets kids excited?
Well, they're big animals. They're, a lot of them are big, fierce animals. They're different. They have characteristics very different from any animals alive today. And they're gone, right? So they're like imagination engines. I mean, they're great for kids' imaginations, right? I mean, they get their toy dinosaurs and have battles.
It makes sense because I had many a battle between Triceratops and Tyrannosaurus Rex when I was young. It was always one-sided, which is unfair. Why on your website do you have never stop discovering?
Because a person should never stop discovering. I mean, they should always be curious. They should always be trying to learn as much as they can.
Is discovery the same as exploration with you?
Discovery is, exploration, curiosity, just trying to learn everything you can about everything. I mean, I don't think I'm curious about everything.
Well, so let me go to a quote then. Let me segue into that. So I asked you the last time we spoke, I said, why dinosaurs? And you said, well, I've always been this way. I like the stars, but I couldn't do anything with them. And then you said, I like biology, but paleontology offered the most amount of mysteries without having to read a lot.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's
we can get into
the
it.
Stars are great, right? I mean, you can look up at the stars, and it's cool to look at the planets, and it's cool to look at the craters on the moon, and there's a lot of cool things to see, but you can't really touch it. You can't. There's nothing you can do with it. You look at it, take a picture of it. That's it. When it comes to fossils or rocks or something, even junk next to the highway, you can pick it up and you can examine it and try to figure out what it is. And if it's a fossil, you can try to put it into context of some sort, try to figure out, what the world was like, but whatever animal it was alive. It's pretty exciting stuff. Biology, biology's cool too. But you have to deal with all kinds of gooey stuff, and fossils are just dusty. And so I'm more into dusty extinct life than I am in, I do like biology, but I'm not big into, cutting things open.
You actually like to cut things open, as per a TED Talk.
Well, I do like to cut things open. That's true. I like to cut open bones, things like that. But the gooey old gut stuff, I'm not big on all that stuff.
I'm gonna say a word, and then I might take it back. It seems like you were lucky enough to grow up in Montana.
I was very lucky to grow up in Montana. I was definitely born in the right place. Yes.
Yeah.
Although as a kid, I would say I was born in the wrong place. It was great to grow up in Montana, but the town that I actually was born and raised in was sitting on the Colorado Shale, which is a marine unit. So all I could find were clams and marine organisms. And the dinosaurs were actually in rocks that, were like anywhere from 30 to 100 miles away. So my mother had to drive me to the places where I could find dinosaur bones. So as far as I was concerned, as a little kid, I was in the wrong place.
As a little kid, yeah. but it was the right place, obviously, because it stoked your interest.
Yes. As I got older and older, I realized I was actually in a really good place because a lot of the dinosaurs that I was interested in were 40 miles west, and a lot of different ones were 100 miles east, and there were also a whole bunch of really cool dinosaurs in Alberta, which was only, I could get to a dinosaur site in Alberta, Canada for driving only, 50 miles. So,
amazing.
I was pretty much surrounded by dinosaurs, and I realized that as I got older.
You found your first fossil at 8 years old.
I was 8 years old when I found my first dinosaur bone. That was a first dinosaur bone. I found my first dinosaur skeleton when I was 13.
So what does that mean? You just went out to a backyard and found it? Like, when you're 13, what are you doing
like
to
I
find
said,
it?
I couldn't go out in my backyard and find anything except clams and marine organisms. The first dinosaur bone I found, my father actually took me to a site where he had remembered when he was younger, he had a ranch, and he remembered riding his horse across some piece of property and finding some dinosaur bones. And so he took me back to that area when I was 8, and sure enough, I was able to pick up a dinosaur bone. When I was 13, by then I knew enough about geology, and I knew enough about where dinosaurs could be found around the area where I lived. I had my parents take me to this place about 40 miles to the west, and I just wandered around until I found a dinosaur.
So living in Toronto, like we had zero exposure to that kind of life. But like I said, I was fascinated. And I remember taking a walk with my parents. I was maybe 5 or 6, and we were going by a gravel road or so. And I always like picking up rocks and just throwing them. And so I was just playing with rocks as my parents were kind of milling around there on the sidewalk. And I picked up a rock that had indentations in it. And I convinced myself that those are perhaps fossils. And so I kept that rock for a few years. Just, I didn't ask anybody, but I didn't tell anybody about it. But I honestly thought there was a fossil. I didn't follow up, but I was fascinated with the fact that I was perhaps carrying it. And
Right.
you said something a few minutes ago, why kids are fascinated. I love these two words together. They're like imagination engines.
They are. Yeah, I mean, you just, and that's the cool thing about when you're a kid. You just got, your imagination is just working overtime, right, on everything.
Yeah.
And especially if you're see pictures of dinosaurs, animals that no longer live, and uh, and especially big fierce one, Tyrannosaurus Rex, for example. All of us kids imagine Tyrannosaurus Rex running around eating everything else.
So let's talk about those little kids becoming adults and becoming scientists and becoming paleontologists. Listening to your TED talk, or one of the two TED talks, you made light of the fact that there were dinosaurs named after people who, or named after scientists who discovered them, who were married to the fact that they were named after them. And you did a little bit of exploration. I don't know if I'm saying this right. And you found that there were quote unquote species found and named. They were not really different species, but were juvenile versions of species already discovered.
Right. Yeah. When people, I mean, the thing is that it's impossible to determine for sure what's what different organisms are different species. I mean, our definition of a species is two organisms that can mate and have viable offspring, produce viable offspring. Well, obviously, you're not going to determine that. You're not going to. You can't tell whether extinct animals could mate and have viable offspring. I mean, it's just not possible. So in order for us to evaluate, a fossil and determine if it's a new species or not, we have to kind of think about modern animals and how much variation there is in a population of one species. And so, if you look across human beings, for example, there's a lot of difference between, the way we look. There are a lot of differences, but you can still tell we're all, Homo sapiens.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can definitely, the difference between Homo sapiens and Pan, right? Chimpanzees, right? I mean, we can tell. We can tell we're closely related, right? But we also can tell we're not the same species. And so when we're dealing with fossils, even if we have whole skulls, all we can do is use that same, the same logic, right? I mean, so we get a whole bunch of skulls and we can see that there's differences between them that are probably just variation within the population. And then, then if you get one that's different enough, then you can say, well, it might be another species. But you can hypothesize that. So in science, that's what we do. We hypothesize things, and then people can come along and either, support that hypothesis or falsify it, show that it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can't really, it's hard to show that it's wrong because you're just never really sure, because with fossils all you have is you just have the skulls or the skeletons. You don't have all of the soft tissue, and you certainly can't watch them and determine their behavior, or look at their colors. The coloration may have been very different between different ones, but we can't see that either. So when it comes to determining a species of dinosaurs, it's kind of a it's kind of a crapshoot, right? I mean, it, so for a long time, people they would they would find a skull and they'd say, this is different enough from everything else that it's probably a new species. But what a lot of people did was, first off, people do like to name species, and so it's kind of cool to name a new species. So it's so there's kind of a I mean, people are looking oftentimes to name a species rather than to have to say, well, it's probably just a variable. And so for a long time, people were picking up these skulls and they were just naming them because they look different. But one of the things that is important to do is actually, look at the age that you're finding them in. In other words, look at the rock strata. And this was one of the things that I was trying to encourage people to do is, so if we look at birds, birds grow up in 1 year. I mean, they grow really fast. So basically, every bird that we have grows up completely. Goes from hatching out of its egg to being full adult size in a year or less. And so, and one of the things we know about birds, I mean, we can identify the chicks, right? We can identify baby birds, and they look different than adults.
Mm-hmm.
And for birds that even have like a crest on top of their head or some kind of a casque on their nose, or things like hornbills or cassowaries, things like that. What's interesting is those display features, those accoutrements on their heads, don't actually start growing until the animals are almost full grown.
Right.
So you can imagine that if you saw them in the fossil record, a 3/4 grown cassowary does not look like a full-grown cassowary because the crest isn't all hasn't developed completely yet. So, so you can see that in the fossil record, you could easily name, a subadult and an adult, two different species because they look so different. And so that's what we've, basically discovered over time that a lot of people did, because dinosaurs are the same as birds, and they change the shape of their head as they grow up. So juvenile dinosaurs oftentimes look very different than adults, and these changes occur very late in their growth. And so they can be pretty big before they start getting all their accoutrements, like their horns and shields and spikes and all that sort of stuff. So people hypothesized a long time ago that they were new species, when in fact they turned out to be just different growth stages of animals that had already been named. I mean, that's sort of it.
Well, you say that's sort of it, but we're in your talk. It was very interesting. I mean, you had a good sense of humor, so you were humorous about it. But the point was very clear, is that you wanted to discover whether they were juveniles or not, and you had museums not give you the permission to explore, because exploring would mean cutting through bone.
Well, a lot, so the way we can actually, you can hypothesize that something is a juvenile, and oftentimes did that just based on the fact that this particular species that someone had named lived, is found in the same age rock as what I would say was an adult. And so it's easy to hypothesize that it is a juvenile. You could hypothesize that just based on the fact that it was found in the same age rock.
Mm-hmm.
But you could pretty much demonstrate it, or at least have strong support for that hypothesis if you could cut the bone open and look inside, because juvenile bone looks very different than subadult bone, and subadult bone looks very different than adult bone.
Right.
Because as we grow, as any organism grows, the bone, there's juvenile bone tissue, and then there's subadult bone tissue, and there's adult bone tissue,
Mm-hmm.
and they're all easy to tell apart. And so by cutting into the bone, you actually can, at least so we cut into the bone, and we could hypothesize that, that we could say that, here's evidence to support the hypothesis that this particular animal is a juvenile or a subadult of something. And, it's going to get bigger. And so, so I was hypothesizing that these would grow into a particular, that they'd grow up and they would be this particular species, but whichever one it was we were talking about at the time.
You were given, can I say curatorship? You were given the keys to your own museum finally in Montana, right? In the 80s?
Yeah, well, for a long time, bone histology, has been done since the, early 1800s.
Mm-hmm.
People had cut into bones, but usually they just, when it came to fossils, they would cut into pieces of bone that were like fragments and, extra pieces, and
Not full femurs.
not full femurs, or certainly not skulls. And in 1986, when I got my MacArthur Fellowship, which came with a lot of money, I used that to build a histology laboratory based on a histology laboratory in France. A fellow by the name of Armand de Reclus in Paris had a bone histology laboratory there, and they were cutting up fragments. And I thought it was really cool, but, I thought we should cut up femurs. And so I built a laboratory in Montana, started in 1986, and really got going in the early 90s. And a lot of people thought it was very destructive to cut these bones. But the thing is, we would take, fossil bone, when you get it out of the ground, is oftentimes cracked, and we actually take them apart at the cracks and clean the dirt out and then glue them back together again.
Right.
The thing is that if you just let it come apart, and then you mold and cast one of those pieces from the mid shaft of a femur, for example, you can put the cast back in it, and you have the complete morphology. In other words, you still have the length of the bone, you still have the character of the bone. You haven't really taken anything away, except you've taken the real bone away that you can slice up.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we were doing. We weren't really destroying anything. I mean, we were cutting things up, but we were making molds and casts of the pieces that we had taken out of it. And so we could reconstruct the bone perfectly. I mean, you could still use it for anatomy or, morphology or anything else.
The point is that you had your own lab where you could finally discover that on your own, and you were falsifying a lot of those hypotheses, to use your words.
Well, we were certainly falsifying the idea that they were different species, and so we were, we were making hypotheses, hypothesizing that instead of being new species, they were just different growth stages of dinosaurs that had already been found.
Tell me about your dino-chicken project, the Chickenosaurus.
Well,
Very curious.
that's a big subject. Back on June 9th, 1993, when Jurassic Park came out, it was pretty cool, and the dinosaurs looked really real, and I mean, the computer graphics were great, and the animatronics that we used in making the movie they were exceptional. They, run by puppeteers. The T-Rex had, I don't know, somewhere around 30 puppeteers running it, and
wow.
it was a magnificent thing, and it looked, it would twitch and blink and just do all sorts of things like a real animal. So I at the same time in 1993, one of my graduate students and I and someone else, we got a grant from the National Science Foundation to actually see if we could extract DNA from a dinosaur, see if we could find DNA in a dinosaur, and we tried a T-Rex. And basically we were just trying to find out if the whole notion of Jurassic Park was at all feasible. Could we find DNA? Could we do anything with it if we even did find it? I mean, but the idea was, bringing back dinosaurs. Was there a way to bring dinosaurs back? And we failed to find DNA, so it was pretty clear that the Jurassic Park way of doing it wasn't going to work. But a friend of mine who works at McGill University, Hans Larsen, he was looking at the time. He was looking at trying to track the evolution of birds, of dinosaurs to birds. He was interested in seeing if he could discover the genetic pathway that would have altered some of these characteristics. I was talking with him, and I, we got talking, and I said, if we can discover the genetic pathway, maybe some of these characteristics are atavistic. Maybe they're ancestral genes that have been turned off, and we can just turn them back on again, and maybe, create some kind of animal that sort of looked like a dinosaur, had the characteristics of a dinosaur. And so that was the sort of the beginning of the idea of the Chickenosaurus, or dino-chicken, whatever you want to call it. And then so I started thinking about it. I wrote a book in 2009 and 2010, somewhere in there. And then the idea we kept developing this idea, and the idea that we might actually be able to at least test some of the hypotheses that we had. And so in about 2012, well, no, it was about, 2011, right around 2011, I got a donation from George Lucas, the filmmaker,
Star Wars fame.
Basically, he gave me $1 million, and basically said I could do anything I wanted with it. And so I said, well, I have this idea, might be able to make a dinosaur. We might be able to at least, resurrect some of the characteristics of a dinosaur. So he said, have at it. So that's what we did. We built a laboratory, a genetics lab, and I hired a couple of postdocs, and we started working on, the dino-chicken project, and to create this thing we wanted to call a Chickenosaurus. And the idea was to look for these atavistic genes to see if, so as every once in a while, atavistic genes kick on, and occasionally snakes are born with legs, little legs. Whales oftentimes are born with with hind flippers, basically hind legs as well. And children are born with a few extra vertebrae in their tail, and because we have an ancestral tail.
Yes.
And so the idea was that birds probably have a lot of atavistic characters as well, and we just need to find them and see if we can turn them back on again. And so we went looking, and someone else a guy named Matthew, the guy at the University of Wisconsin had found evidence of atavistic gene in talpid chicken of teeth. And so he was able to initiate tooth growth in the jaws of birds. And so that seemed like proof of concept to me, that there might be these atavistic genes. And so, they're hard to find. And so my postdocs were just basically gene screening, going through a whole bunch of genes, turning them on, seeing what they characterized, what would come from one particular gene, and it was a long process, and in the end, which was just recently, we discovered that the tail, so one of the things we wanted to be able to change the shape of the head, transform the wings back into arms and hands, and give it a long bony tail like Archaeopteryx or Velociraptor or something like that. And so, we went through all these gene screens and all sorts of things and came to the conclusion that the tail was not an atavistic gene. In fact, birds never accidentally have a long tail. But we did discover what had happened during the course of evolution between dinosaurs and birds. We discovered what had happened, and it actually turned out to be more interesting than had it been an atavistic gene. What we discovered was that evolution had co-opted the immune system and actually fused together a whole bunch of vertebrae that had one time made a long tail, and by fusing these vertebrae together, it had given it this characteristic of having what is called a pygostyle tail, which is what birds use. It's basically their tail flight structure, right? It's their tail, which allows them to fly, right? So, and maneuver. And so, what we had discovered was basically the evolutionary pathway from a long-tailed dinosaur or Archaeopteryx-like animal to a modern bird, and discovered what it was that had happened to this tail, which now we know how to reverse. I mean, we do know how to make a bird with a tail, rather than the pygostyle structure that we see in modern birds. So we have been able to discover that, but back in 2012 when we started this thing, I thought it would take about 5 years to discover these atavistic genes, and of course it's been more than 5 years since 2012, unfortunately, but we have finally figured it out. It just took a lot longer than we expected. And in the meantime, a lab at Yale University was able to do some genetic modifications and alter the shape of the head to make it look, a bird to look more like a velociraptor than a bird. We also have discovered what it is that fuse the arms together, the hands together to make the wing. So basically, we do know we have all of the characteristics right now that we were looking for. We actually, theoretically, we've never done it, but I mean, we theoretically could. I mean, we'd have to do a lot more experiments to find out if it all would work, but we have the components. I mean, we know how to alter the shape of the head. We know how to make arms or arms and hands instead of wings, and make a long bony tail. So I mean, that's pretty cool.
Pretty cool is understating it. Sure. So what does that mean? Is it being? Is there an active project in play to make that happen?
Well, after all of these years, a lot of people have weighed in on the de-extinction, and everybody's got their own opinion of whether we should do this or not, right? I mean, it all goes back to Malcolm in Jurassic Park saying, just scientists are so, I don't know, I forget how the quote goes, but scientists are so concerned about whether they can do it, they forgot to think about whether they should do it. And so, a lot of the general public started weighing in on this, and the general consensus is, yeah, it's great that you can do it, but we probably shouldn't do it. And I don't have that. I'm not like that. I mean, I think we should try to do it, but on the other hand, where to do it? I mean, all of the research so far has been done at universities where they have the equipment that we can use, and universities don't want to be in. They don't want, if public opinion says we shouldn't do something, they're probably not going to do it, right? So we're probably going to have to we're going to have to find an island off the coast of Costa Rica or somewhere like that. It's not like, genetic modifications like this, turning on atavistic genes or making a long tail of a bird. I mean, it's not really any different than the genetic modifications to make things like chihuahuas, right? I mean, breeding is genetic modification. A lot of people don't like to think about it that way because it's slower.
Every single breed we have is a genetic modification. Yeah,
that's exactly right. They're all GMOs, and so a chickenosaurus, is an altered chicken. Chihuahua is an altered wolf. I mean, I don't see that there's, I don't know how you could justify one and not justify the other.
There was another thing that I don't want to miss this too, because I also remember as a kid, going back to my fascination with dinosaurs, I had all kinds of books on dinosaurs. My parents used to buy them for it, especially my mom.
Yeah.
Like
I still have mine.
But I had them for years, and then a book came to me. I forgot who got it. Let's say my mom did. And opening up the pages, I go, "What is? I've never seen this. This can't be a real dinosaur. It's not in the. This is me in my head. This is not in the literature that I'm used to." What am I? 9 years old, 10 years old? The Maiasaurus,
right?
Which is a dinosaur that you discovered and named.
Well, I named, my friend Bob Macla and we named it. The original specimen had been found by a woman named Lori Trexler, amateur collector. We excavated it and we named it. Yes.
And what did you find in the excavation? So it's very good of you, by the way, to name that woman, because she came to you and she showed you all the things that she found that were.
No, that was her mother-in-law, Marion Brandvold, and she didn't come to me. We went. It's a long story, but Bob Macla and I were actually looking for juvenile dinosaurs at the time, and someone suggested that a colleague suggested we go stop by this rock shop and identify a large dinosaur that the people had found. And so we went there and went into the rock shop and identified the dinosaur. It was a duckbill dinosaur, a big one. And as we were leaving the rock shop, this woman, Marion Branpold, said, "Oh, by the way, what you know what these little bones are?" And I knew exactly what they were right away. They were baby dinosaur bones. They were baby duckbill dinosaur bones. And I was very excited because she was holding in her hand more baby dinosaur bones that had been found in the whole world at that time. And so I was very excited. I said that it was really important and that I'd like to see where they came from. And a couple of weeks later, she took us to the site and we excavated a nest full of baby dinosaurs, 15 or 16 of them. And right nearby is where Lori Trexler, her daughter-in-law, had found the skull of that we would name Maiasaura. But they hadn't really excavated very many things. They didn't really know how, and so it was in poor condition. And so then Bob and I went and excavated what was left of it, and it turned out to be a pretty nice specimen underground. And we took it back. I took it back to Princeton, where I was working at the time, and cleaned it up and was able to determine, yes, indeed, it is a new species. And by comparing the skull bones of the adult with the skull bones of the little babies, we could see that they were the same species, or at least hypothesized that they were the same species.
Mm-hmm.
And so we named the dinosaur Maiasaura, which means good mother.
Who came up with that name?
Well, pardon?
Who came up with that name?
The name actually, the person that helped was my boss at the time, a guy named Don Baird,
mm-hmm.
who was the curator at Princeton University. He came up with the name Maiasaura for us.
That's a great name. It's a great name.
Yeah. By then, we not only had this one nest with 15 babies in it and the skull of an adult, but by then a friend of ours who we had met while we were out excavating all of this stuff, found a second nest out there. And the second nest actually had smaller babies that were, so the nest of 15 babies, all the babies were about 1 meter long. And the second nest that was found, the babies were a half a meter long. They're half that length. And so, and they were associated with a bunch of eggshells. So we were pretty sure they were hatchlings. And so just from these, two nests, we could see that the babies hatched out at about a half a meter in length and grew to a meter in length at least while they were still in a nest, which suggested they had to have had parental care and food had to have been brought to them by the parent.
I still remember that new dinosaur book with Maiasaura that I'd never seen before, and they colored it yellow, and she was hanging around her nest. It's a huge nest in the ground. Yeah, so I always remember that, like 1984, 85 or whatever.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And now, Maiasaura we have more specimens of Maiasaura than any other dinosaur.
Oh.
We have its eggs, we have its embryos, we have juvenile, subadults, adults, and hundreds of skeletons. And we've got their footprints, we've got fossilized poop. We've got skin impressions, and in fact, if you want to see a Maiasaura, a beautiful specimen is in the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto.
No kidding.
So you should go see it.
Oh, damn right I will. Thanks for that heads up. I told you before in the earlier conversation. I just remember the T Rex at the entrance of the dinosaur portion of the museum. There's just a T Rex, the skeleton of the T Rex, facing down towards the entrance. When I was a kid, I was in heaven,
Oh,
absolute heaven.
well, T-Rex, T-Rexes are a dime a dozen themselves. I mean, they're not really common. I mean, they are common. We find them all the time, but they don't. We don't know very much about them. We have a couple of subadult specimens, or maybe half-grown ones. We don't have any babies. We don't find their nests. Their footprints are really rare. I mean, we don't have their eggs. I mean, just there's a lot of stuff we don't know about T-Rexes. So, you know, Maiasaura is a dinosaur we know probably the most about.
What we do know about you is and you're a very modest guy, so I'm going to say it. You've worked and been working around all over the world at excavation sites all over the world. So I mean, we talked about a few: Mongolia, northern China, Patagonia, Romania, France, Spain, Hungary, Africa. Where you train folks and you help on archaeological or you help on digs. You don't collect and bring back to Montana. And there's another thing that was very interesting that you told me, that now, because you've been doing this for decades and decades, your former students are profs, curators, anatomy trainers, and so forth. You also mentioned that you saw a stark difference in women getting into paleontology pre and post Jurassic Park.
Yeah. Yeah. No, before Jurassic Park, before the movie came out, all of my, I won't say all, I had a couple of females that wanted to be paleontologists, but it was mostly men, mostly guys. And after Jurassic Park, it was about 50-50. I mean, um, Ellie Sattler, the female paleontologist in Jurassic Park, attracted, Laura Dern, her character, attracted a lot of young women into paleontology. I mean, it was absolutely great. So we turned the whole thing around, and now I would say that the percentage of females in dinosaur paleontology is very high.
Yes, but not really, because we respond to stories, and we respond to the story makers, like your Steven Spielbergs, like your Michael Crichton. But those story makers, let's call them culture makers, they also need to be inspired by folks, and so they're inspired. I mean, again, here, not to be patronizing, but they're inspired by people who are always discovering, who don't give a shit. They're going to cut through a bone in a skull because they want to see whether the hypothesis is right, and they get their material from guys like you.
Yeah, well, we certainly, out on our initial dinosaur digs, we always had, we had a lot of, it was definitely, at least 50-50 male female.
Wonderful. What kind of perspective, because you've been doing this for so many decades now, I'm going to say, like, you've now that I've gotten to know you a little bit, I don't pretend to know you, but a little bit here, based on a few conversations, you've kept your childlike view in the world. What have you discovered about human life in your explorations of ancient reptile life?
What did I discover about humans?
Yeah.
Well, I've discovered that a lot of humans aren't very curious.
Mm.
I'm a teacher too, and I'm always trying to get students to wonder about things, and especially in this day and age. I mean, they just look they just go on they Google everything, right? then that's their answer. And I say, there are more answers than that. I mean, and a lot of things can be figured out. And if you figure it out, you'll figure out that a lot of Google, a lot of things you get as an answer on Google are not accurate at all. And so, I really, trying to get people to use their brain and try to, figure things out rather than use chat GP or TT or whatever it is to answer all of their questions. I mean, it's, seems like, we're getting away from people, being amazed and
Mm.
curious about the whole world, the whole universe. I mean, everything. I mean, it's not good. I don't think it's a good thing. But on the other hand, I'm an old guy, and old guys are always thinking back and saying, "Oh, back in the old days, things were better." Well, that's
But you haven't done that. I mean,
no,
even in your online properties and your websites, they're very forward thinking. I mean, you're trying to engage the viewer. You're trying to engage the participant into exploring. I mean, all the listener just needs to go to your two websites and they see that. They see it. They're very open.
well, I mean, just consider right now. I mean, you think about. I mean, one of the most amazing things to me. You go to a university, like the university where I work. I mean, there's no geology department anymore. They've got rid of geology. Now,
Hmm.
it's mind-boggling, right? I mean, we live on Earth, right? A giant rock, nothing but geology, right? I mean, it's where all of our minerals come from. It's where we get oil and gas and dinosaurs and gold and silver. And I mean, basically everything comes out, think about all of our minerals and, soil that makes all of our plants grow comes from the rocks. And yet, we don't have geology departments anymore. As if, what? I mean, we aren't, we've got probes out there examining other planets, right? When we don't even understand our own planet that well. I mean, it's just a curious thing. I mean, you can get, you know, they'll build a satellite to go, and look at the moon Titan, right? But can you get that same amount of money to go, look for a dinosaur?
Well,
No.
This is that's a great point. I guess this is why, in retrospect, I asked you that question about understanding human existence and seeing things and not seeing things, and it's similar to what was shared by Julie Church, and she lives in Kenya, and she explores oceans. She's an expert in everything marine, and she has said a similar thing to us. It's like we're out there trying to explore space, which is great, but we don't even know 4 to 6%. We only know 4 to 6% of what's underneath our oceans.
That's right. Yeah.
And which begs the question, what is it that's on this rock or in this rock and underneath those waters that maybe could change culture?
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Mm.
It's a peculiar thing. I don't understand. I don't pretend to understand it. I do not understand, what the big push is to go. I mean, I like astronomy. I mean, I like looking out there, and I think it's really cool that we have this, Webb telescope.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, we should be putting the equal amount of money into all the rest of our science exploring our own Earth.
I wouldn't disagree with that. I mean, if I had billions of dollars, maybe I could help out. But for now, we just have a podcast, so maybe this is the way we can contribute. Okay, so I thank you for your time. This has been really great, Jack. One last question. We like to ask our guests. What does greatness mean to you?
Greatness?
Yeah.
That good question. I don't know. What, greatness. There was a lot of greatness to the dinosaurs, right? They were great big.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm not sure where you're headed there.
Well, I'm not headed anywhere. I'm just asking.
Yeah, I don't know.
Just that it's no big deal. No big deal. It's good. I really I like your honesty. You're very frank. So let me go back then to two things, just to give you, I guess, kind of my closing comments on this. And I've written it down. If this is the second time I'm repeating, imagination engines. Makes sense when you put those two words together to describe the experience of dinosaurs, because I remember myself as a child. And when I remember myself as a child in an excited state, in an exploratory state, I remember the feeling of just being able to, or knowing that I could be anywhere and do anything.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that kind of spirit to this discussion.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And let me just say, go outside and find something. Go outside and pick something up off the ground. Examine it.
Right.
Look at it. So you can tell what it is. Use your imagination.
Yeah. Thank you.
Pick stuff up.
And happy anniversary.
And happy anniversary.
Hey, it's Enrico Colantoni here, actor, director, and dedicated napper. Like what you heard today? Make sure to subscribe to Behind Greatness and share with your friends. And consider donating to help us produce more great conversations at behindgreatness.org/donate. Until next time.